segment that we've started with Truthout Radio. We partnered with them, truthout.org. Check them out online. My first guest, my second guest, Leopold, who has written a really powerful piece in Truthout, and I encourage you to check it out. And it's about how our government is violating human rights of prisoners held at Guantanamo Bay. Hey, Jason, welcome to the Truthout segment for Truthout Radio.
It's great to be with you. Thanks so much for having me on.
You're very welcome. Now, I read your piece on Truthout about the central character in your piece is a man named Adnan Latif. He is a Yemeni citizen who sought medical help after he had a car accident in Pakistan, and then he was swept up in a general sweep of suspected terrorists after 9/11, and he had been held in Guantanamo Bay since 2002. Unfortunately, he has died in Gitmo, and your story was about, it was a profile piece essentially like who he was, what he went through in this prison, and how the government is essentially stonewalling any investigation on the cause of his death.
Yes, Adnan Farhan Abdul Latif. He was, as you indicated, a Yemeni citizen, and he was one of many people, unfortunately, immediately after 9/11, who were simply at the wrong place at the wrong time. That's the easiest way to describe it. In my story, I highlight that when the U.S. invaded Afghanistan, and many of the prisoners we started to detain in the war on terror, they were sold to us. They were sold for bounties. We purchased them. We paid bounties, for these prisoners. And in fact, I include an affidavit, or rather a sworn declaration from Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson, who supports this. And in another case. But Adnan Latif was simply someone who was trying to seek medical help, and he left Yemen. It's a very poor country. He did not have any money. He was in a serious car accident when he was in his late teens, and spent 7 years obsessively trying to receive medical care. He has a wife and a son. When he left home to travel to Pakistan to try to received medical care from an Islamic charity, his son was just 3 years old. He would never see his son again, nor would he see the rest of his family again. And he was picked up at the Pakistan-Afghanistan border in December of 2001. In his possession, he had his medical records, which more or less should have, supported his reasons for where he was. But, as I also highlight in the story, we simply detained people for a certain Casio watch that they were wearing at the time. And, what I really wanted to do in this story, because this is truly tragic, what I wanted to do was humanize this person. Many of the stories, as I'm sure you're aware, that come out of Guantanamo, we simply don't know who these people are. We don't know anything about them. We sort of feel that, well, everyone in there is the worst of the worst because that's what we were told. But it's simply not the case. And here you have a person who 2 administrations had recommended for transfer, yet he continued to languish in this hell, which is what he called it. And, I was fortunate enough to, after his death, to speak with his family. And it's truly heartbreaking. As I indicated, he leaves behind a 14-year-old son. He was just 3 years old, and they had hope that he would eventually make it home. But
I was looking at a map of Yemen in relation to where Pakistan was, and there are a couple routes that you can take to get from those 2 points. I'm not sure what the route was that he did take, but why was he in Afghanistan when he was in Pakistan for a while, but how did he get into Afghanistan? Was that ever made clear?
It's a great question. Yes, he simply, when he was in Yemen, he first went to receive treatment in Jordan, and the Yemeni government paid for it. They paid for his treatment, but it didn't. He did not make a full recovery. while he was in Jordan, he met someone from, an Islamic charity who said that, he could perhaps get him some help. And supposedly, the way at least the story has been told, he traveled to Pakistan to seek out this person, and was told this person was in Afghanistan. And that's more or less how the reason he ended up in Afghanistan. For about a month, he was at this charity, and he just never made it back to Pakistan, where he was supposed to receive the treatment.
Okay.
So that's the sort of murkiness that the U.S. felt like. Well, that's it doesn't sound like his story is solid. But he, he was more or less being accused of being a Taliban foot soldier, and the medical records would have at least shown that it really was in no condition to be, fighting at all.
Right, and I was also looking at one of the other things is that once he got caught up in that sweep and was transported to Gitmo, one of the things that you highlight in your piece is the use of sedatives, the fact that they're giving these prisoners vast amounts of sedatives, antidepressants. They're essentially drugging them up. And I'm thinking about this from a human rights perspective, and
Absolutely.
I know that we've been looking at abuses that happened at Abu Ghraib, but this is something that is ongoing. I mean, we're at 10 years into this, and we're still
more than 10 years.
More than 10 years, and we're using drugs that essentially can be brought up in a sense in a human rights violation. I mean, why would you do this to a person? I understand that sometimes prisoners get violent, but it seems like that they routinely used it on this prisoner that you profiled.
Yes, they did, and in fact, one area of my story that I highlight here is that 2 years ago, my colleague and I filed a Freedom of Information Act request to get a copy of a report that my colleague Jeffrey Kay found out that the Defense Department had done an investigation. Defense Department Inspector General, had done an investigation into the use of drugs. And actually, it was mind-altering drugs, and whether those drugs were used in an interrogation. Mm-hmm. Well, just a few months ago, we actually received a declassified copy of that report under the Freedom of Information Act. And it's stunning, and it's explosive, and it really does underscore how widespread the use of drugs were at Guantanamo, and still are. For example, when detainees get out of hand, they are subjected to what's known as chemical restraints. We don't know what they're injected with, whether it's a pill, but it's some form of medication or pharmaceutical, some sort of drug, actually, and it's the norm. It's what takes place over there. So detainees are expected to be compliant. They are expected to obey their masters, if you will, for lack of a better way of describing it, but that's exactly the environment that they're in. And, this particular prisoner, Adnan Latif, he was not a compliant prisoner. He was, he refused to, bow down to his detainers. And so he was considered obviously not a model prisoner as a result. Yeah, and I think you do highlight that in your piece, but one of the things that my key takeaway from it, and when I'm talking about human rights, I'm not just talking about the abuse of prisoners, but I'm also talking about a trial by jury or being charged for a crime. And so right now in our political culture and in our larger culture right now, as we're in this last 2 weeks of a presidential campaign, not one mention has been made of Guantanamo Bay. So it seems like there is no political will or political desire to highlight anything that is going on with regards to human rights. But what your piece brings up is the importance of that, because if our government is doing this to the worst, supposedly the worst of a society, prisoners who are wrongly accused and sometimes rightly accused, what's to stop the government from doing things to its own citizens, which we have. But what would you say to
to people, because we're really not paying. I mean, it's not in the dialogue right now. But what would you say to people as sort of a as a closing statement about what they can do? Because your piece highlights, it humanizes a person, but the takeaway is, what can we do about this?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. Look, people are fatigued. These are issues that no longer that the public at large no longer seem to care about. You know, part of the problem is that if you start caring about it, then you start getting outraged at the current administration, because these are policies that this administration, is responsible for. The buck stops at this president, put into place by the last administration. So really, it's a matter of stop looking at these issues through a partisan lens. It's not a Republican or a Democratic issue, and so unless the public really does speak up, nothing's going to be done. I mean, not even Congress is paying any attention to this. So it comes down to if no one's making noise, no one's going to try to fix something. They're not going to try to fix this issue. They're certainly not going to address it. I mean, look, if they're not even bringing up questions at any of the debates about Guantanamo, human rights, or civil liberties at large, they're not going to be proactive and start taking steps to address it if there is no pressure that they're facing, and the public really doesn't seem to be that interested in it. That's not to say everyone. I'm just speaking
the public
as
at large. Yeah,
the public at large.
Right.
You recall what we were used to or seeing during the Bush years, and it was different than what we're seeing now.
I want to thank you for being on our Truthout Radio segment on American Liberal.
Thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it.
Hey, we're coming back in just a few minutes with Scott Lay from around the Capitol to talk about some of the California propositions that may change the economic and social dynamic here in California. You're watching American Liberal here on T Radio B.